Hello, BookTube. Had a little extra time today and managed to get to the Brattle bookshop here in Boston. That's, for those of you who haven't heard my endless mentions of it, it's a used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston that is just fantastic, absolutely incredible. It's a three-story shop, but next door has an open lot that they fill to the brim with bargain books. $1, $3, and $5 bargain books. They line the walls. They're on wheeled carts. They change all the time. So it's possible to go to the Brattle. The shop prices indoors are perfectly reasonable, but it's possible to go to the Brattle on the outside sale carts and spend $20 on 20 books. It's possible to do that, and there'll be good books too. And I went to the Brattle today. It was glorious, just glorious. I got there at just the right time so that the entire lot was bathed in sunlight. Or it's a little lot surrounded on all sides by buildings on a narrow street. So the moment when the whole lot is covered in sunlight it's a very small window. And I wanted it to be that because it's gloriously hot and humid here in Boston. Just wonderful, like wrapping yourself from head to toe in a delicious blanket. And I got there at just the right time, and I browsed all the carts. I have bought a lot of secondhand books in the month of July, more than I planned to, and more than I want to, just as a general rule. So I kind of had the brakes on the whole time that I was shopping there. It doesn't always work, but I found 3 books. I got 3 books today at the Brattle that I wanted to show you. The first one is a UK trade paperback, which I just love. I think the general design of UK trade paperbacks, the tightness of the binding, the quality of the paper. Needless to say, the design of the covers, I just love it. I wish it would be my model for commercial book publishing anywhere in the world. The publishers would print a very limited run of hardcovers of their new releases, but the things that those would be for special orders or for libraries. The thing that they would ship in boxes to bookstores, the things that you would see them reading, the things that everybody would be holding up on YouTube and anywhere else, would be trade paperbacks. Really sturdily made trade paperbacks, well designed, and that's it. And there's no more of this ridiculous rondelay where a book comes out in a hardcover with a dust jacket for an obscene amount of money, and then a year later or 2 years later it comes out in a trade paperback that's poorly made for an obscene amount of money, and then maybe later it either comes out as a hardcover remainder, if you're lucky enough to have a good remainder shop, for a reasonable amount of money, or it comes out later on as a mass market paperback for a reasonable amount of money. But either way, the system is front loaded in order to generate a huge amount of money, and as a result, the industry is killing itself out of sheer greed. When if new books came out as $15 trade paperbacks, not only would more people read them, not only would they sell more, but there'd be a lot less of that front loading. But anyway, one way or another, I love UK trade paperbacks. When I see them here in the United States, if the book is of any interest to me at all, then I grab it. Largely, I admit, in this case, nudged in the elbow by the format. And it's also one of the allures of Book Depository for me, because you can get UK trade paperbacks on Book Depository, and some of them are so lovely that why wouldn't you? And this one is an author that I have always wanted to do right by. I've never actually actively liked anything he's ever written, and I have a suspicion he is not an author where I think I've never liked anything he's written, and with good reason. He's one where I think maybe I'm just not in the right mind frame, and it's John Banville. This is the book, Ancient Light, in a UK trade paperback. The story of an old man looking back on his life and a time when he fell into a passionate love affair when he was a very young boy, he fell into a passionate love affair with a much older woman, a woman almost twice his age. And now, later in life, he's looking back on that. But the act of remembering that love affair is inextricably linked in his mind, and gets more and more linked as the narrative goes on, with tragic memories of the tragic fate of his own daughter. And I read it when it first came out, and I think it was 10 years ago, something like that. And like everything else that John Banville's ever written, I've never missed anything that he's written. He's an Irish author from who wrote for most of the 20th century, and most of the second half of the 20th century, and I've never missed anything that he's written, and none of it has ever worked on me. I remember reading Ancient Light when it first came out, and thinking, okay, it's heavily mannered in the manner of Iris Murdoch. It's heavily self-referential in a way that gets old fast and that has not dated well. And I'm willing to think there might be a mistake there. I'm willing to think that I'm wrong about this author, and that he's playing a more subtle game that I'm just not getting on the right wavelength with. I remember having the same problem with William Trevor, until a passionate reader, who's sadly no longer with us, pointed to a couple of his long short stories that she said were absolutely brilliant. And this was a person whose intelligence, whose opinions I absolutely trusted. And to hear that come out of the blue forced me to revisit the whole subject. And when I did, she was right. There was a whole lot going on there in those stories that I had missed, even though I'm on a fairly good wavelength with Irish stories and Irish storytellers. But it's never happened with this author, and I'm going to see if this is the time when it does. So I will report back. If it does click, then I'm hoping that whoever sold this paperback to the Brattle sold a whole bunch of other UK trade paperbacks of John Banville, because I wouldn't mind having them all. The one thing I noticed about this paperback that certainly wouldn't have conveyed, I don't remember what the US version of this looks like, if there ever was one, but there's Sebastian Barry recently wrote a very, very strong novel. He's a strong author in his own right, and he has a blurb on the cover of this book that I want to read to you, because it is a testament to Steve's self-restraint. Okay? The blurb is, could any book be better? Did it even need to be as tremendous as this? I'm going to give Sebastian Barry the benefit of the doubt and assume two things. One, that he was caught up in exports of happiness when he wrote his review, and two, that he's a personal friend of the author. One way or another, lines like that are inexcusable in blurbs. Whether this is the excerpt from a book review or whether this is a blurb that the author went to him for, such sentiments are inexcusable. Those of you out there who are tempted to write blurbs for books, or maybe who've done it, kindly avoid calling a book perfect. Okay? If War and Peace is not perfect, then Ancient Light by John Banville is not perfect. So just don't use the word. It puts those of us who write blurbs, all of us, it makes all of us look bad, so don't do it. Then the next one is, it's in ratty condition. I didn't buy it to keep it. I bought it mainly just to absorb its contents. And it reflects on the Victorian period, which I've said on this channel many times. I maintain that the Victorian period is the single greatest period of human creativity just across the board that the species has ever known. Greater than Periclean Athens, greater than the Quattrocento, greater than the Enlightenment. I think the Victorian period is the greatest outpouring of human inventiveness and creativity and subtlety and intelligence that the world has ever seen. Whether it's medicine or science or astronomy or geology or literature or poetry or drama, you name it. And the Victorians did it just fantastically well, example after example after example. Not as in the case of, for instance, the 17th century, where you can name 3 people who did it really well, and after that, no. In the Victorian era, you've got 10, 15, 20, 25 people all doing great work in any genre. There's only one drawback. Victorian architecture has come to be revered. Victorian poetry has had its renaissance, its day in the sun. The Victorian practical sciences, although they've been superseded by the 20th century and the 21st century, everyone looks at the books themselves and says, well, these are marvels of English prose. They're a joy to read, even if their discoveries have been superseded. Same thing with Victorian history. You have later works that you absolutely have to read, and that, unveil new archives, look at things from new perspectives. But in terms of prose, you go back to the Victorians, because it's just these rolling, gorgeous periods. There's only one discipline. There's only one human discipline for which the Victorians have not had a renaissance yet. There's only one human discipline where the Victorian era is viewed with titters of disdain, with a kind of polite mockery or ignoring, and that's art. Victorian art is viewed as kitsch. It's viewed as campy melodrama. And I think that's a shame. I am as big a fan of Victorian art as I am of anything else the Victorians did. And I actually found a book on if Victorian art is looked down upon and slighted as being of very little artistic worth, the whole of it, straight across the board, except for the Victorians who were dabbling in Impressionism or the brutalist, futurist movement or whatever. But the main body of Victorian artists are viewed with disdain bordering on contempt. And if the whole era is viewed that way, then the part of Victorian art that's viewed with the most disdain is Victorian narrative painting, where Victorians where you would create a giant full color canvas that tells a story, Hogarth style. It's totally out of fashion now. No one does it, and the Victorians were big fans of it. They did a lot of it, and their paintings are brilliant. Their narrative paintings are brilliant, and believe it or not, and you will believe it if you've ever been to the Brattle bookshop, because you see everything at the Brattle. Believe it or not, I found a book on Victorian narrative painting. It's by Raymond Lister, and it's from about 50 years ago, and it just contains 60 artists. Most of the paintings are done in black and white. You'll get the full painting, the full thing on top, and the detail on the bottom. You get an artist portrait very briefly on one side, and then a sample painting on the other. There are, in the course of this volume, let me see if I can find one, there are some color paintings. Look at that. That is beautiful. I don't understand why Victorian art has not had its heyday. One of my favorite artists of all time, Edwin Landseer, the greatest painter of dogs, he has a famous painting. One of his most famous paintings. His most famous painting is Monarch of the Glen, but one of his most famous paintings is in here, and I love it. Of course, it's the Old Shepherd's chief mourner. This hardcover is in poor shape. I'm not going to bother to reinforce or repair the cover, because I don't think I'm going to keep it. Because the thing I want, I know what I want, and I don't know if it exists. It could, for all I know. I want a gigantic book called Victorian Art that's 5 times the size of this, and where all the artwork inside is in color, and where many of the little portraits, many of the profiles of the artists in here are very scanty on details when there's much more that's available now. And I don't know if such a thing exists or if anyone's out there writing it. I want to be ready, because it's a book that did that. A book that got everybody talking about Victorian art again would be wonderful. But in the meantime, I want to soak this up, especially since it's bound to tell me things about some Victorian artists that I don't know. And then the next book, the third book that I got at the Brattle today, is also an art book. I've been racking my brains trying to see if it was the companion to an exhibit at some museum somewhere. I can't for the life of me remember, and I think I would, considering the subject. This is by Hugh Honor and John Fleming, and it's Venetian Hours. And it's a book, all mostly in color, of the artistic, literary and artistic responses to the City of Venice by Henry James Whistler, and John Singer Sargent, one of my favorite painters of all time. And it takes you through their responses. There's a beautiful Sargent painting of a canal in Venice, and I have never read this, and I can't wait to. I can't wait to see. It's full of prose, so there'll be a whole bunch of stuff in here that I've never read, I'm sure. letters from Whistler, letters from Sargent, all about Venice. And the reason why I grabbed it, of course, some of you who are new to the channel might not know this, which is that I love Venice dearly and lived there for a time. And this is when a lot of the popular images of Venice were frozen in the public mind. They were frozen by these people, by James in a famous novella and a famous novel, and by artists who encountered Venice and gave it life before it became a tourist attraction, when it was a decaying, smelly, weirdly beautiful place. It's still weirdly beautiful, but it's hard to avoid. In the modern day, it's hard to think of Venice the way Whistler or Sargent did, because you're seeing building tall cruise ships coming right up, so you could hit them with a line drive if you wanted to, and that kind of ruins the effect. But that was my Brattle trip today. It was Venetian Hours about Venice, Victorian narrative painting, and Ancient Light by John Banville in a UK trade paperback. All things that I plan on exploring this weekend. I was glad to get to the Brattle today because, once again, the weather forecast here in Boston is for extremely unsettled weather and perhaps tumultuous thunder and lightning downpours tomorrow. In the back of my mind, I had kind of sort of planned to go tomorrow, but nope. No, I went today. If tomorrow's going to be unsettled weather, Frida and I will just hole up inside, and I will write all day, because I have ninja deadline upon ninja deadline. So as usual, they come not in single spies, but in battalions. So I'll be having a lot of writing to do. But anyway, that's my latest Brattle trip. Once upon a time, if I'd had a BookTube channel at the time, once upon a time I did this every day. But now I don't anymore. I don't get to the Brattle as often. I'm much more conscious of not just blindly accumulating books. I want to decrease the number of books I have in Hyde Cottage, not increase it. But not only that, but it's not in my routine anymore. It fell out of my routine when I was caring for two sick old dogs. I couldn't justify being away from them at the end, especially when they reached a point. And old, sick, frail dogs will reach a point where it moves from the back of your mind to the front of your mind that you're not actually sure they'll still be here when you get back if you leave for any length of time. Once you reach that point, I didn't leave them for any length of time, and that broke the habit of the Brattle, and I haven't reestablished it because I like spending time here with my puppy. so Brattle trips are, as a consequence, kind of rare. So whenever I go, I show you my proceeds. but I'll wrap this up for now. 3 books, that's all, and yet we got to 20 minutes. But I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.